Today, I wanted to talk about the combat system of Mass Effect 2 and address the question, is it good? To answer this, we will start as always by defining good for this context and then take a comparative look at some similar titles that on the surface might seem varying degrees of weird, but trust me, I will explain to you how the sequels, Guild Wars 2, Gears of War 2, and Dead or Alive 5. Oh wait, I don't think that one was supposed to be in here. Well, we'll just have to see what I will compare. First, thank you for clicking. Hey guys, Dr. Epic here, back with some more meta-gel. To define good in a video game in general or in reference to a combat system specifically, I think the core question is simply whether or not it's consistently entertaining, i.e. fun. Fun in games derive from whether or not it's satisfying, whether or not it has depth and a reasonable skill ceiling and learning curve. Now, Mass Effect 2 is a major departure from the combat philosophy of Mass Effect 1 with a more streamlined action shooter focus than the RPG nature of Mass Effect 1. Mass Effect 1 looked more like Guild Wars 1 with tactical positioning and skill combinations being key to a successful combat encounter. Now in Mass Effect 2, gone is the overheat focused gameplay, now you can reload like every other shooter. Mass Effect 2 has also clearly taken some inspiration from the success of Gears of War, where the first Gears of War actually launched just a year before Mass Effect 1. Now Mass Effect 2 is even more like Gears of War in the sense that they're both fleshed out cover shooters. If you have played Gears of War, you will instantly know what I'm talking about when I say that Mass Effect 2 is comparatively clunky. Even compared to sequels, Mass Effect 2's cover mechanics are clunky. Mass Effect 2 is a much slower game than Mass Effect 1, at least it feels like it. You have fewer powers to utilize and to level up, you have less ammo, that is, finite ammo. What you get in return is the feel and immersion of a more tactical or tactical experience. It feels grittier and more serious. Even the biotics have been modified perhaps unknowingly to make the game feel more tactical and less space magic-y. In Mass Effect 2, as far as biotics go, though there are more powers, enemies usually, at least on higher difficulties, always have some sort of armor or shielding that now negates the ragdoll physics of the biotic powers, unlike in Mass Effect 1, where you can mostly wreck an entire room just using a few biotic powers and you could lift a friggin' Geth Colossus. Luckily, this also means that enemies no longer stunlock you, vice versa, or paralyze you with their biotic powers, so there's a trade-off. In Mass Effect 2, the only biotic power I really like and always have to have with me is Warp. That is on the surface a pretty boring power, let's be honest. So to be clear, Mass Effect 2 is a completely different game, combat-wise, than Mass Effect 1. Which brings me to my Guild Wars 2 comparison. This is also a sequel wildly different from its predecessor in regards to its combat system. Both Mass Effect 2 and Guild Wars 2 received praise for their combat system's upgraded fluidity and style. Guild Wars 2 received a lot of acclaim for it being fun and smooth, with criticisms largely simply revolving around that it was just a drastic change of the combat design philosophy, not whether or not it was good or fun, just the fact that the charming, unique system of Guild Wars 1 that you were accustomed to no longer existed in the sequel. Mass Effect 2 also drastically changed the combat system from Mass Effect 1, though perhaps not as drastically as there was cover shooting mechanics in Mass Effect 1, but no jumping mechanics in Guild Wars 1, for example. But why is Mass Effect 2's combat not as loved as the Guild Wars 2 combat system comparatively is? This is probably due to the clunkiness, like I said earlier, and the oversimplification of the depth provided in Mass Effect 1. A lot of things are perhaps oversimplified in Mass Effect 2 compared to Mass Effect 1. We lose a lot of gun variety, though you can easily argue that the guns that are present in Mass Effect 2 are better, more fleshed out, and actually different from one another, more so than the Mass Effect 1 guns, where it just seems to be simple stat changes between weapons, and in Mass Effect 2 you have, like I said, more unique weapons like, of course, who can forget the heavy weapons. The heavy weapons of Mass Effect 2 are so good in my opinion, and it's so sad that they basically don't return in Mass Effect 3 or Andromeda, save for some black stars and missile launchers here and there in the Mass Effect 3 campaign. I mean, come on, who doesn't want to throw a friggin' black hole at their enemies, or a snap-freezing avalanche? I think Mass Effect 2 has a decent amount of satisfying weapons and powers to use, even though the gameplay is a bit slow compared to the other Mass Effect games. It would be nice if Shepard could run for a few more seconds, but I get that Shepard's tired from carrying around a literal nuke on the back. I have to say it's a bit sad and negative that the game took so much focus away from the powers, giving each character sometimes only 2 or 1 offensive power, like Grunt, who can only use concussive shot, and then the other abilities are just the passive fortification and incendiary ammo. I get that it's to make each character sufficiently different from one another, because there are a lot of squad mates in Mass Effect 2, and to force the player to spice up their combinations. But I'll be honest, on my first playthroughs, I always chose Garrus and Miranda, just so I could get Warp and 2 overloads, as well as Garrus' concussive shot. And while this takes its toll on the depth of the game's combat system, it still works. Whenever a game restricts power of the player, I find it to be more serious, more challenging, and more rewarding and more immersive. Say, in Andromeda you have a bunch of superpowers, and I feel like it takes away from the tension of the game. Its immersiveness and fun. It's like comparing Halo 3 and Halo 5. In Halo 5 you have a plethora of more enhanced mobility abilities, making you more powerful, but in my opinion it makes me feel too powerful, at least on lower difficulties. I don't always want to feel like an Avenger. This is why Peter is the best Marvel superhero. I mean, come on, you just saw the ad. In summation, I feel like Mass Effect 2 doesn't suffer too greatly from the slower pace and the more streamlined and reduced roster of powers, but it is definitely a drawback for me though. All in all, Mass Effect 2 I find to be possessing a good depth, a reasonable learning curve, and satisfying combat with hard-hitting noises and feedback. While simple, the cover mechanics are responsive and smooth enough. The skill ceiling is perhaps a bit low, but on higher difficulties it feels more than just right. We all remember that insanity fight on Horizon. In conclusion, I think Mass Effect 2 combat system is good. But do you agree or disagree? If you want to, you can just leave a comment down below. Wait. I did promise you in the intro that I would compare the combat systems of Mass Effect 2 to Gears of War 2, Guild Wars 2, and Dead or Alive 5. Okay, well, let's take a comparative look. Let's see. Dead or Alive 5 is a fighting game. Apparently, like in the other games in the series, fights in Dead or Alive 5 are based on an interruption triangle system in which strikes, normal attacks, beat throws, throw speed holds, strike interception attacks, and hold speed strikes. All of such counterattacks causing extra damage. Tag team battles from the previous DOA games have been retained. The fights take place in interactive and now more highly destructive arenas. Alright, so much like Mass Effect 2, Dead or Alive has retained some key elements from their previous games, as well as innovating on their combat encounters. Most people don't know this, but the people working on Dead or Alive franchise would be sent to work on the Mass Effect games as punishment during development. This is largely how the galaxy-exploring love boat concept came into being in Mass Effect. In the beginning, Mass Effect 1 was just designed to be a pure polished cover shooter without any dialogue, in concordance with EA's strict abstinence-only policy. I have to say guys, Dead or Alive 5 has some pretty good depth in all the right places, it seems. You know what? In light of this research, I will have to redo this review. Compared to Dead or Alive, Mass Effect 2's combat is a steaming pile of... They even have better spin-offs.